So welcome to another episode of HeroTalk, where we talk to ordinary people who do extraordinary things, heroes of culture, business, technology, and philanthropy, who all have one thing in common. They want to change the world. And today I'm joined with a very special guest, one of the most accomplished marketers that I know, an individual who I promise, because I know you're a very humble individual, Pat, and I promise I wouldn't go down the list of positions at the accredited institutions that you've held illustrious jobs at, but I'm going to embarrass you anyway, because I feel like we have to set the precedent of letting our viewers kind of know how much experience that you have with respect to the subject matter that we're going to be talking about today. Ladies and gentlemen, my good friend, Pat Lafferty. Pat is an individual who is, a veteran of the advertising industry, having held a variety of positions from COO of McCann World Group, CMO of the Travel Channel, CEO of North America for BBH, President of Translation, and most recently President of McGarry Bowen. And for all of those who are familiar with the ad industry world, you can understand that Pat has earned his stripes, right? And so today, Pat, I really want to talk to you about something that you know a lot about, and that is the current state of the advertising industry, the future of the advertising industry. Hopefully, for your and I benefit, we hope it has one. But in the wake of COVID-19, I know it's going to look very different. Well, first and foremost, welcome to the show, and I want to jump right into it. I really want to jump right into it, right? Recently you wrote an article on LinkedIn about change, and that sometimes brands, agencies have this reluctance to change, and until something like this happens. And I felt, and I found your article extremely provocative. And there was one thing that really jumped out to me that was really endemic to the conversation I wanted to have with you today, Pat, which is this concept that biologically we're wired to not want to change. Like, that change is unnatural. And despite everything that we've been taught about evolution and our kind of almost predispositions to change based upon environmental factors, socioeconomic factors, a variety of things, and based upon your article, we have a tendency to seek validation, right, that supports our kind of subconscious desire to not want to change. Is that an accurate assessment of kind of what you wrote about?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it is pretty amazing. And people way smarter than me have done a ton of research on this. And that's when I drew the quote from the New Yorker article that cited it. There's an amazing book, Thinking Fast and Slow, that's like, 400 pages of evidence on this. But yeah, it's amazing. We get a little bit of reward every time that we hear something and kind of translate that to reinforce our existing beliefs. And so it just, that kind of locks us into a place that's really hard to lock us out of, because it feels good. It's like chemically feels good to our body.
Now, what is fascinating about that is that the marketing world, and this is something that I believe for the majority of my career, and why I've, followed extremely intelligent individuals like you. I consider you a mentor, someone who I look to as a thought leader. This industry is filled with some of the smartest minds that I've come across, with access to literally millions of terabytes of data that help them make informed decisions about should support the need for change. How do we allow ourselves to get drunk or high off of our own supply, so to speak, and not follow the data and read the tea leaves that basically say, guess what? Disruption is a foregone conclusion, and if you don't protect and insulate yourself, you're going to be a victim of it. Because that's really the conundrum for me. How do all these intelligent people ignore the signs?
Yeah. Well, I think inertia takes a hold, as well as what we've talked about as far as the chemical reinforcement. And you're reinforced, the success that you've had gets reinforced, and you have more success, and you add to that, and you add to that, and to the point where that train is going so fast down the tracks that even when intellectually you can understand that change is afoot, it's really, really hard to change directions. And it really is the organization that has to step in and put things in place to force evaluation, to kind of make us stop, make us think slowly, so that we can take all of that intelligence and apply it in different ways. But if the organization doesn't have things in place that force that, left to our own devices, we'll keep doing what feels good, even beyond, when we intellectually can understand that there's something going on. I mean, Kodak is, I cite the Kodak example
Yep.
as famous at this point, but I mean, the fact that they even had the foresight to develop digital photography, but then consciously chose to bury it because they were worried about it cannibalizing their film business. I mean, if that's not the biggest, warning sign, I don't know what is. Because most organizations don't get to the point where they develop the innovative idea. They stop short of that because they're so busy, pouring coal on the fire of what they've done and what they're succeeding at. So the organization has to put things in place that forces that evaluation on a regular basis.
So talk a little bit more about that, Pat. How do brands and organizations proactively put in, and I don't know what to call it. Is it R&D? Is it innovation? Why do most organizations wait for a critical event like COVID or like 9/11 or like this the housing crash? Like, why do we wait for crisis to compel most brands to change? And shouldn't change be something that is coursed out on every company's? It should have a roadmap or a trajectory based upon the human behavioral insights that are shaping or dictating the way they should be going to market and the innovation opportunities that follow that. Why do most companies wait for a crisis moment like this in order to then realize they need to change?
I think so much of how we train, develop, grow people in organizations is built around rewarding them for doing what they do really well. And so obviously that gets reinforced much younger,
Yeah.
school age kids, but when you get to the workforce, it continues. And we build up these incredible people who are really good at what they do. And then we get in this really delicate position where we know they're really good at what they do. They know they're really good at what they do. And then it becomes a little bit of a dance of like, how do we keep them happy so they keep doing what they're doing to keep the money coming in? And there's I think both the organization and the individual, kind of put things up that stop that change from happening and that examination to happen. Because to examine something is to acknowledge that things could be better, or that there is innovation, that there is improvement, that there, and people take that very personally. If it's not a part of kind of the DNA of an organization, certain organizations, 3M is famous for this, where they built in, it is an expectation that you innovate a certain percent of your time, and your compensation, your reward is tied to that. But those kind of organizations are really the exception. It's normally the other. It's okay, keep doing what you're doing, and we're going to build stuff around you and reinforce and reinforce and reinforce that.
It's kind of this concept of almost rewarding people for doing well on the assembly line, right? It's almost like this task-driven mentality versus rewarding people for wanting to disrupt the assembly line and raising their hand and saying, I have an idea on how to make it more efficient. And the new companies, and you talk about these change-a-lots, they're the ones that create cultures that advocate and encourage their employees to raise their hand, participate, share ideas in an attempt to make the collective better, where these would-nots, or even could-nots to some degree that you cited in your article, really are about maintaining a level of social order within their corporate culture that sometimes inhibits people's individual potential or desire to participate or invest in making the collective company better. Is that kind of a fair statement?
Yes, absolutely, because the people get to certain positions of authority and power, and that's a comfortable place to be. And new folks coming in, oftentimes, whether it is explicit or implied, get the message that they need to drink the Kool-Aid and fall in line with how this or that person has done things because she or he, is really good at it. And so, and we folks who come in with a natural curiosity, with a natural ability to change and innovate, kind of get that squeezed out of them unless they're given an outlet, unless they're told and shown that it's good to have that.
So talk to me a little bit about these three tiers of businesses that you've cited, right? Because I think where we're getting right now is what you don't want to do, right? Which is what we've just outlined, to kind of the cultural approach to developing an innovative business and how to do that. And we've seen so many disruptors enter this space. I was just watching MSNBC, and they had probably a company that is become synonymous with that, the Warby Parkers of the world, who have all these DTC brands that are literally coming in and eating these legacy companies' lunch. What are they bringing in at the early stages of their companies that really set a foundation that change is not necessarily going to be something that is stimulated by an external event, but something that's going to be a constantly ever-present changing fundamental of how they run their business?
Yeah. What I think is interesting is the would-nots that I write about, when they first started or so a few years into their development as a person or as a business, I think they were very change-minded. In fact, it's something compelled them in many cases to leave where they were and to go and do it better. And that original kind of energy and vision was very strong, and that, hey, I can do this better, we can do this better, let's leave this place and go do it. Then they go and they do it and they have success, and then they become like the place that they left, in that they believe that they've got the better recipe and they just need to keep following that recipe. And they had months or years of reinforcement to reinforce that with them. So I think that's an interesting part of this, that they once were people that embraced change, and that was kind of they rebelled. Then they went and did something, and then they got comfortable with the success that they had. The could-nots that I talk about are what happens when a bunch of those would-nots then kind of band together in a holding company, or there's rapid consolidation. You're seeing it with the direct-to-consumer brands as well. The big corporations are seeing the success there. They're buying them up. The risk is that they just become a part of the corporate machine and get put in their slot among the 20 companies or 30 companies or 30 brands that company has, and then they fall into the same pattern. It's kind of a cycle that keeps repeating itself. And very few of the big corporations can infuse and have things in place where they can force that change and innovation on their own.
Well, it's interesting. So to some degree, their size, their growth, the success that they start to have starts to create a level of complacency and I guess conservative behavior, right? That says, why rock the boat? We've established so much. And then maybe they romanticize the foothold they have because they focus on the now versus looking, towards the horizon to see what potential disruptive influences may be coming down that may have an impact on their business, right?
Yeah,
Whether
and I
it's
don't even think it's, in many cases, I don't think it's a conscious, I think companies consolidate, big companies buy smaller ones, bring them in because they fill a need within that portfolio. But what happens is then you get, pegged as filling that need. I'll give you an example. One of the places that I led on the agency side, very strong at certain aspects of the business. Those aspects of the business were becoming fewer and far between. They were just, the cycle of marketing and technology and where things were going, the core competency of this agency was still amazing. It just was, there was less demand for it. So when I flagged that we needed to innovate and add different capabilities and expand and evolve, the answer I got was, no, you do this. Instead of you expanding and changing or evolving, just work with these guys over here or these people over here, and because they do that. And the dilemma was that I couldn't grow and evolve that business without expanding and innovating capabilities. But that was not my role or our role within the holding company, because the holding company had bought up entities that do all that. And so it just stopped innovation and growth because we were in our box, and that's the box that we were supposed to do.
So it's almost like there's another entity charged with innovation. We're in charge with basically churning right now and driving revenue. And someone else is in charge of doing that. At some point, they'll tell us how we need to innovate, despite the fact we got the boots on the ground. We're really involved in seeing what the hell's going on for our particular business. But we have to wait to be dictated by someone else who has somewhat of a detached purview on what's going on with us in real time to tell us what we need to do to innovate. It just doesn't seem, it seems like a fragmented way of thinking about change.
Yeah, well, imagine, I mean, this is a pretty basic example, but imagine, there's a media company that has a newspaper division, a digital division, and a TV division. And consumer behaviors evolve, and the newspaper business says, gosh, in order for me to continue to be relevant and have a viable business, I need to expand my business digitally to take advantage of what's going on here. But the company says, no, we've got a digital division, so you keep doing the newspaper. Even though people are buying fewer and fewer newspapers, that's your role.
Yeah.
So again, you get put into what that role is, whether it's good for that business or not, because that's your job in the family, if you will.
Interesting. So let's switch to the advertising. We spoke a little bit about brands. Let's switch to the advertising industry, because the biggest conundrum for me, right, or the conflict is that a lot of these agencies are tasked with working with these disruptive businesses, these change-a-lots, right? They're to some degree, they're involved in architecting and designing their go-to-market strategy to disrupt the legacy players. But they're not practicing what they're preaching. They're not practicing the same principles they're applying for the clients in which they have been selected to develop a disruptive strategy for. So, right, prior to the COVID-19, the advertising industry was in trouble, shrinking budgets, working more on a project basis, and almost like the attrition of the AOR type of moniker. We have obviously issues with diversity and these big monolithic companies that felt somewhat culturally out of touch. We have content coming in and being brought in-house with brands, right? And these huge agencies not being equipped to kind of play the content game that impacts a business model that is predicated on selling you $2 million 30-second spots. So with an agency that was somewhat reluctant to change prior to COVID-19 and in trouble prior to COVID-19, where do they go now? Is this agency in trouble in a dire way? Do they have a chance to pivot? What is the recipe needed for them to kind of get back on course?
Yeah. There's a lot that has to happen. And obviously agencies are often a reflection of their clients. So they're so intertwined in this. And just as there are, legacy agencies that hold on to the way they've been doing things, that they do that because they're legacy clients who keep paying them to keep doing, what they've been doing. So it would be naive to say that those things are separate. But that being said, I think agencies have to look at both the what and the how. What they make and work with clients to make, and how they operate. And in the what category, first and foremost, it needs to be actions before ads. We are well past the point where consumers expect and want to see what a brand is doing, how it is behaving first. Then, if you are authentically behaving a certain way, then you earn the right to have some communications that tell me about that. But if you jump right to telling me, I'm not buying it, because I'm looking over there and seeing what you're actually doing, and that's not consistent with what you're saying. So actions before ads, and agencies have to help clients really lean into that. It gets tricky because there are often systemic issues at clients that they behave a certain way, and the marketing group is not responsible for the retail group or whatever. And so the in-store experience is one thing and the marketing is another thing, but those have to come together, and agencies have to help clients make sure that their actions are right first, and then their ads. And you've seen some wonderful examples of that here, in a crisis. Brands that instead of jumping right to an ad, they did things first. They behaved first. They spoke with their actions, and then they reinforced it with ads. I think Budweiser, the whole AB InBev family, is a really good example of that across many of their brands.
Now, what do you say? Sorry to cut you off, but what do you say to brands that say, speaking is easier than behaving, it's more efficient, and I'm a business that has to scale. I'm about reach. I'm about awareness, right? How do I scale behavior in a way where it impacts enough people to make a real difference?
Yeah. Well, you have to start with what you're doing inside your organization and how you are behaving as a company first. And those should be things that don't have to cost a lot of money, but that, once you behave a certain way inside your organization, your employees become, walking, breathing examples of what you represent outside the organization. So I understand that the old model of like a sponsorship or something like that can be expensive and can be very targeted and focused from a number of people you reach standpoint. But this is even more fundamental. It's whether it's the Warby Parker or the Bombas example of, okay, our business model is such that we're going to, make money here and we're going to give over here. So it's those kinds of fundamentals about the business that have to be rethought.
Interesting. So you were going into a second piece. I think it was the how.
Yeah. So no, I'm still on the what's. I got three
Okay.
what's and three how's.
Okay. Okay.
So the second what is marketing as a service,
Okay.
not just, again, communication for communication standpoint, but have your marketing serve a greater purpose in addition to communicating. Have it be a service. So, and a great example that we've seen during this crisis is Domino's taking their ad time and turning that into, hey, we're hiring people. We'd like you to work with us. Come apply. Um, I mean, brilliant, I think. I mean, it certainly gets the word out about Domino's. It puts their people front and center, and it's serving an incredible need at a time when so many people need employment. So, if you can find ways where your marketing can be a service, not just a means of communication.
Which also speaks to your previous point about behaving, right? That
Yes.
is really marketing a behavior. Like Dove doesn't sell soap, they sell self-confidence. So
Yes.
as long as they invest in owning that attribute, that emotional attribute that is in service to somebody's emotional fortitude or well-being, they're going to experience a benefit that's unquantifiable to the level of brand love to some
Yes.
degree that they'll receive for it. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
No,
The
amazing.
third what is something that you and I have talked about for many, many years, and that's brands being a part of culture. Not just observing, not just kind of lobbing in things, but actually being a part of culture. And here too, we've seen some great examples. I already mentioned AB InBev across their brands. They've done some, I think, very smart things about being in culture. This is a really tiny, you could say even, silly example, but over in Paris, Burger King, when everything went locked down and all you could do is go to grocery stores, you couldn't even go to a fast food place. They put an ad out that had the recipe and the actual brands, that you could go and buy to make your own
Whopper.
Yeah. I mean, like,
awesome,
I just love that. Like you're not even driving your own business, but you're so in culture in a way that you understand that people have this passion and the desire. And if the only way they can get it is by going to their grocery store, you're going to help them do that. So that took some fortitude to be able to do that. Can you imagine telling the CEO, okay, we're going to do an ad that has nothing to do with our product. It's actually going to get people to buy other people's products, but it's going to build love to us because we're in culture.
Or the Colonel saying, here's the 11 secret recipes that go into my fried chicken,
Yes, exactly.
But yeah, I think that's the selflessness that brands that get it exhibit, because they understand that quantifying brand affinity is not always a one-to-one, right? And what I mean by that is, hey, in order for me to get something from you, right, I got to give to get, or I got to receive something in exchange for me giving you something. But when you give selflessly without the expectation of reward, is really when you basically count on human nature, human values, right? And some of the basic moral principles that we've been taught by our parents that say, I got to be associated with that person because they stand for the same things that I do, right? And that's hard to measure. It's a brave step to take because there's very little data that suggests that that's going to work. You have to believe in your heart that that's going to work. But to your point, we're seeing a lot of brands who have embraced that point of view, who are subsequently experiencing a lot of growth, right? And how do you get a brand to take that leap of faith and say, you know what, this may be something that you may have to take on a leap of faith, but you need to do it because it's the right thing to do?
Yeah, I think you have to help everyone understand that this is about a relationship. And just like in human relationships, if I was only giving you something with the expectation that I got something out of it, that would be a pretty short relationship. We don't want to be around folks that are just kind of gimme, gimme, gimme.
Yeah.
We want to be around folks that have some generousness to them and how they behave, and we're attracted to that. And consumers are attracted to brands that are like that. It's so fundamental to human nature to be attracted to that. So you boil it down to that level, it's undeniable.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
So you said now the hows. We have three
hows.
hows.
Yes. First is from relay race to Scrum.
Okay.
For so many years, the ad business was one of, the client hands off to the account person hands off to the strategy person hands off to the creative team hands off to a producer. And it was this kind of, relay race. So much more today, it has to be about a Scrum, where you get different people who are together on an ongoing basis. It doesn't mean that folks still don't have their area of expertise. They got to bring that to the Scrum, if you will. But there also has to be a flexibility to be able to organically pivot and evolve together, because you're getting different stimulus from different parts of that combined team. So that's a really hard behavior to change, and I think you've seen in some of the folks that have broken away, if you will, or new entities that have arisen. They've been able to kind of get that Scrum going and resist and offer an alternative to the relay race. The relay race takes a lot more time, costs more money, and usually results in less good work. Not always. There's some wonderful work that has come from that, but with the amount of change and technology and ways to be able to interact with consumers today, that Scrum is much more agile and able to adjust and be relevant on an ongoing basis.
Incredible. Well, I think is that desire to create that siloed effect more about justifying billable hours per department? Is it something that still ladders back to your ability to maximize profitability as a company, or is it more about ownership? Because I also noticed that within the agency world is that sometimes the lack of collaboration muddies the waters for who owns the idea. And owning the idea is something that is extremely coveted and guarded within certain departments, whether that idea came from strategy, whether it came from the creative department, and getting your name on that credit, or being able to say, I developed that autonomously, or within the department I lead, sometimes winds up creating siloed walled gardens within an organization that prohibits the level of interactivity that you're talking about, right? So how do you find a way to inspire cultural change that is more accepting of, a little bit of what could be construed as healthy chaos, right? Because you are getting creativity, you're getting a faster production line and process, because producers are now in part of the creative process, and they can help shape an idea and figure out ways to make it more efficient, so you're not problem solving or quality controlling on another level. Strat people are constantly now involved in the whole process, instead of, to your point, handing the baton off to creatives to then interpret their idea, because there are additional insights they could bring through the process to refine it. How do we get a way of organizing that symmetry and integration in a way that they don't feel it's cumbersome or impacts their ability to efficiently output good work?
Yeah, I think it starts with leadership, in that it is, as you've noted, Joe, it's harder to lead. It's much easier to lead the relay race handoff, because it's neat and tidy. getting different folks together and having, a flexibility in the process is hard. It's really, really hard. And we, like most industries, have underinvested in developing leaders that can lead in a dynamic situation where you've got lots of different people. Again, we gravitate towards what's comfortable, and I guess the rigidness of the handing off is the easier of the things to lead, and therefore that's what we gravitate to.
Mm, mm. Well, for me, I run a boutique agency, and, I think one of our benefits and competitive advantages is our leadership is involved in every aspect of the kind of developmental journey as a way to quality control it. So we don't put unnecessary pressure, or some of our subordinates or colleagues get the benefit of some of the core insights that help drive the idea. So we don't wind up with, a creative faux pas miss, or something that may be culturally misconstrued or insensitive because that individual didn't have the benefit of really tapping into the origin of where the insight came from and the thought process of where the insight came from. And I feel like, to your point, leadership has become this almost, it's become somewhat driven by apathy, right? And there's so many times that I've been in conversations with people, either on the agency side or on the client side, that says, you know what, I delegate that to these individuals, and then I step away because I don't want to infringe upon that person's ability to manage what it is. And I think that is one of the core cultural changes that needs to happen, because why does it always need to be seen as an infringement versus a way of improving or adding value to? It seems that there's still an antiquated way that most businesses that have a structured hierarchy think.
Yeah, well, I think it's either delegated, or the opposite of that. The leader is still involved, but it's her way or his way. Again, whether that is implicit or explicit, let people know not to mess with so and so. So either way, you've got the leader has to create the environment where, if they're involved, people are still very comfortable disagreeing and building on top of what the leader does at the same time. So that environment, whether the leader is directly involved with it or not, is critical. And that we all know that that's where the leadership nuance comes in, is eliciting the best of people who all have different styles, different experiences, but drawing the best out of them. And you have to adjust to the different folks. You can't expect them to just magically adjust to the one way you know how to do it.
Interesting. So how number two?
How number two is from hourly rates to ownership and annuity. The definition of commoditized business is one where there is a surplus of supply. There's lots of agencies, and they are all compensated similarly, meaning hourly rates. So with that, in an oversaturated market, there's always going to be 5-10 agencies in line who will do it for $1 cheaper and $1 cheaper and $1 cheaper and $1 cheaper. And so agencies, and we've seen this has been the cause of death of agencies prior to this pandemic, where they just got squeezed to the point because there was always someone that was willing to do it for less. And it's not that we have to be building efficiencies, and this pandemic there's many lessons in more efficiently and effectively doing things. So it's not that I'm anti-efficiency by any means, but you have to have strength of a business to be able to say no when you can't do it for a lower price. And how you get strength in your business is you have a diversified portfolio. The only way that you can't have hourly rates be the only way that you make money. Agencies, in my opinion, need to own some things they need to own some things and invest in those, the ownership and the growing of brands, so that they can learn from that as well as make money in different ways. And then there's other annuity types of marketing, like licensing, that would be an example that I believe agencies should be in the business of doing as well, where it's a win-win. If an agency comes up with great ways to extend a brand through licensing, that is all bottom line to the client, because it's adding a new thing to their business that wasn't there before without any of the cost. Then the agency can share in that. And the way licensing works is the agency that helps and does that for a client then gets a share of that for a set period of time. So different kinds of business models, just like, we're taught from a young age to have any of our investments to have a diversified portfolio. Don't put all of your retirement in one thing, for example. So too, agencies have to have a diverse business, so that when one part of the business is pressured or there's circumstances that affect it, you're not solely dependent on that so that you have to shut down. You've got other ways of making money.
Are brands ready to have that conversation? I know some of the smaller brands that don't have the type of financial bandwidth to kind of like be traditionally attractive prospects to specific agencies have found ways to kind of create additional value via equity participation and things like that. But are some of the bigger brands ready to have that conversation, given the fact that there's a lot of other companies or businesses out there that would be willing to do the hourly rate thing, be willing to be paid on net never terms, net 600 and whatever, but how do we get, it's two to tango here. Are brands ready to have this conversation? Are some of the bigger brands ready to have these conversations?
I think I would say many of the bigger brands are not ready, and therefore you have to start with the smaller brands. Or the up and coming brands, and then have some cases that you can show to the bigger brands. Back to the topic that we started with, about the difficulty of change. The bigger brands are going to require more data points, more proof that what you're talking about can actually work. And they would need that anyway. But I think agencies in many cases have done themselves a disservice, because they have years ago made claims that they could do things that they couldn't do. So clients are rightfully skeptical when agencies say, hey, we can do this, we can help you with this. So you got to build up that trust with some examples. And there are plenty of up and coming brands that are more willing to experiment and do things differently, that then can build cases to show the bigger brands.
Interesting. And the final how?
Final how is from silos to a combination of physical and digital. And the silo here is obviously referring to, still in so many instances, whether it be on the brand side or the agency side, things that are physical are in one group and things that are in digital are in another group. And this pandemic has taught us many things, but it certainly has taught us that you have to be seamlessly working in a physical world and a digital world, or else you become, flat-footed and change passes you by. So, and this is hard. This is really, really hard. I think this is an area where agencies, in some regards, have moved faster, even though it was not really fast, but it was faster than many client organizations. I still come in contact with client organizations where digital sits over here. Sometimes, whether it be separate from marketing or separate from the product, whatever, it is still siloed off in another part of the organization. And that cannot be. It is, we were in a world before all this, and now we are certainly in a world. It's almost like 10 years of change in 10 weeks here. So if you were resisting that before, if you resist it now, you will fail to survive moving forward.
Wow. Wow. So just I'm going to recap. I'm going to recap for the sake of time because I do want to get a final word from you on, um, you know, your prediction as to what's going to happen in this space. But you talked about the what's, and we started out with this concept of actions before ads, which, obviously I think is foundational to, or table stakes now in terms of what brands need to do, just given the amount of data we're seeing with how the level of marketing and advertising fatigue that consumers are being exposed to, right? We talked about this concept of marketing as a service, right? How is your company offering more value? How's your brand offering more value how are you using your marketing assets to provide more value to your customers beyond just maybe the transactional benefits that your product provides, right? And then this idea of participating in culture, right? How is your brand leading culture, not just riding its back? How are you actually continuing to invest in what people love, what people care about? How are you becoming endemically associated with those attributes? And then when we move to the how, we got this concept of moving away from these siloed ways of working to a Scrum methodology, right? How do we bring the best of everyone into more of a collaborative process from start to finish? So from insights to activation, how is every lead from every associated department that's going to play a role in bringing that piece of work to market, working collaboratively throughout that process to minimize inaccuracies or to increase the probability of success, right? The next how is diversifying revenue, right? All right, man can't live on bread alone, and agencies can't live on billable hours alone. So we need to move them down the pipeline of thinking more creatively around how they quantify their work, given rising competition, given brands' unwillingness, ability to leverage that competition to their benefit. How do we create value propositions that insulate us from competitive attrition, as well as our clients taking advantage of our willingness to bend and flex because there's not really a lot of other options that we have. And then the final how is this concept of balancing physical and digital more, probably leaning more on digital, just given what's going on right now. If we don't find a way to optimize the way that we work digitally, because it benefits our ability to tap into efficiencies, speed to market, a variety of things that being proficient in terms of managing those two worlds together, especially given the fact that travel and being places physically and being able to shoot and bring people together may be challenged. How do we continue to embrace digital best practices in order to kind of bridge the gap until we get back at least to a level of normalcy, right? Is that an accurate recap, sir? Without taking my notes?
That's well done. Well done. Well done.
Well, look, I've been a student of Pat Lafferty for probably going on close to 20 years now, sir. So I am someone who soaks it all in. You believe that? So one last question. Does the advertising industry have a future? What's your prediction for this industry? And, myself, I feel obviously it's going to continue to go through a massive disruptive change, whether it likes it or not. To some degree, the brands have been complicit in it not changing as rapidly as it should have, because to some degree, their dysfunction has been tied to the agencies, their models, and that they're used to relying on dysfunction. How do we get this industry operating correctly, Pat? And are you hopeful that we can?
Yes, I am hopeful. I think that many agencies, along with their brands, will use this incredibly accelerated learning to fuel change and innovation moving forward. If this doesn't, nothing will. I mean, like, we are and this is going to sound horrible, but like, in a way, this was the wake-up call that organizations, agency and client side, needed to really embrace change and innovation. And if you can find opportunity in this, as opposed to, you know, trying to get back to the way it was at some point a few weeks ago. If you can find opportunity, that is how your business is going to move forward and be successful. But you've got to lean into that. It can't be about holding out and waiting for things to get back to the way they were.
Awesome. So the moral to that story is lean into change. On that note, I'm Joe Anthony. That's Pat Lafferty. He's definitely a hero. All right. And remember, you don't have to be superhuman to be a superhero. You just have to believe that you can make positive change in the world. Get out there, be a disruptor, be a change maker in your industry. We need it now more than ever. And this man is giving you some amazing tips on how to begin the process of disrupting yourself for the better. Pat, thank you so much for joining us, man. Let's do this again soon. This has been long overdue, and a stimulating conversation as always, my friend.
Thank you, sir.